Drawings coming directly from SketchUp can have a very, shall we say, sketchy feel to them. And this is by design, of course. It's called SketchUp for a reason. You want your drawings to look loose and free and easy to interpret and easy to modify and make comments on if you're a client or a peer. But we often want to do more photorealistic drawings. Who doesn't love a wonderful image that looks like a photo, or at least similar to it? And to do that, there are a number of different what are called rendering programs. They take the three-dimensional geometry, the materials, and the lighting, and they apply all of those to create specialized, highly photographic models, model views. And a couple of them are standalone, which is to say you take your model and you import them into this project, into this program, and something like V-Ray works that way, or 3ds Max. You import the whole kit and caboodle, and then you set things up there. And if you make a change to your model, it can be more or less irritating to try to go back to the model, change, say, the way something is shaped, or the way an arrangement of materials or arrangement of site elements are, and then have it re-render. Now, Enscape, the one that we're talking about today, is what's called a real-time renderer. And what this will do is you make a change in your model, boom, you see it right away in your Enscape rendered view. And there's a demo here, and typically what you'll see here is a kind of side-by-side workflow. You make a change, and it changes right away. Your views can be synchronized. You can add people, and like magic, they show up in your model. And this is particularly good for, Enscape is particularly good for some of the entourage that we use so much of, trees and plants and scale figures. Those will bog down your SketchUp model like crazy. And even in this video here, you can see that the Enscape view compared to the SketchUp view, I'll just zoom in on a little bit. The SketchUp view has these kind of blobby shapes, and those are proxy objects, which we talked about. Anyway, and it works in a number of different programs, including Autodesk Revit and Rhino and ArchiCAD and Vectorworks. So it's really great, and it's a wonderful workflow because you don't have to exit your program in order to keep these wonderful renderings. Also, another fun thing is that there's a discount for education. Yay, we love discounts. And the discount is really good because it's free. You can renew it every year, I believe. All you have to do is use a student ID, which is verified by your email address. I believe they may still ask you to upload a photo of your ID to get the freebie. All right, let's take a look at SketchUp and with Enscape. So back here in SketchUp, I have installed Enscape, and it's plunked a lovely toolbar right here on the top of my screen. And there really isn't much you need to do to get going. Basically, it's going to render whatever your view is. And if I have this button here clicked, this is the synchronized views. Any change that I make in my views here will be reflected in the Enscape window. To launch the Enscape window, you just click this button, Start Enscape. And it might take a minute for the geometry to export and the window to load. And here is my Enscape window. And you can see here immediately that the drawing looks very nice. I can click and drag with my left mouse button to move around the model. I can also scroll in and out. And you can see that Enscape has kind of sharpened up a lot of the materials. The roofing looks particularly nice. There's a lot of ambient occlusion, which is kind of a very highly processed way of handling shadows. So you get a lot of subtlety around roof overhangs, window projections, even some of the fringing that you sometimes see around cutout objects like fencing looks pretty nice. We also have a background image here of the which is kind of just a gray horizon. And other things to notice is that this grass looks grassy, and it's a lot of things SketchUp is going to have in the name of the materials, things like grass, I think is the name of that material. Enscape will interpret that. So if it says carpet, if it says water, Enscape will interpret those as special materials and apply a sort of default grassiness to it. Interesting enough, some of these things will move. The grass will sway in the wind and the water will look like it's flowing if you have those settings turned on. Now, one of the best ways to operate in Enscape is to have it side by side with SketchUp. Now, if I had two monitors handy, I would do that, but instead I'm just going to drag my Enscape window up and to the right and then down a little, and that allows me to choose SketchUp as the kind of side-by-side view. Now, of course, it would be nice to have a giant computer monitor to do this, but you know, we'll have to make do with our dinky little computer screens. That's the way it is. So sometimes these menus will get a little bit annoying because they take up 90% of your screen, but such is life. So the first thing that you'll notice is that if I switch to, say, a sketchy view, there's no change. Enscape does not render sketchiness like that. If I go to an interior view, it does render the interiors in the same kind of quality. It also provides a lot of ambient light. I don't have any lighting, artificial lighting, inside this building, and yet it seems very light. It's basically doing what your camera is doing in real life. It's adjusting the exposure so that the rendering looks good. If I have a section perspective active, it will cut away the building. And lo and behold, we're seeing through the building, we're seeing glass with transparency, and we're seeing inside it. Right now I don't have any materials. If I were to come to my SketchUp model and go in here and edit it, see if I can find the floor, go to the paint bucket, and let's see, let's try a carpet kind of material. Try a diamond yellow carpet. Oh, very nice. Paint that on the floor. You can see that immediately my model has updated. Okay, and if we zoom in enough, you'll see that it actually has some texture to it that looks very carpet-like. So Enscape is doing a lot of work for us by making that carpet look so much nicer and more photorealistic than the SketchUp view. So when working in Enscape, sometimes it's nice to have it synchronize views, but sometimes it's not nice. You get a little more flexibility if you untether the two views, if you unsynchronize them. Now I can zoom in, I can kind of have free reign here. I can still make changes to this model, but perhaps they are going to look a little different. Now here, first of all, let me tap the letter H in the Enscape window, and it brings up the controls. And maybe I'll maximize my screen view so you can really see these. And the big thing is that there are some basic controls that you can use your keyboard with. You can look around and orbit the model also using your mouse buttons. So commit those to memory. Also, you can teleport to a location. For example, if I want to go here next to this bench, I just double click and it will zoom me to that location. The other thing is that I can change the time of day either by holding down Shift and dragging my cursor. See, if I do that, you'll see the timestamp on the lower right change. I can make it kind of nighttime. Oh, look, the stars are out tonight. How nice. Now, I don't have any electric lighting in here yet, so it looks pretty dark. You can also do this by tapping the U and the I buttons. So if I zoom way out again, and I'm just using the mouse, you'll see that the sun is going to set, or actually it's dawn here. And these can be quite dramatic views, right? That's a very lovely way to see your model, especially if you're putting together some sort of presentation. There are other things that you can control, including how fast you move. Holding down Shift makes you move fast. So if you're using the arrow keys, and I'm just going to go backwards, and I suddenly hit Shift, I'm like running away. Obviously, it works in the other direction. I find the arrow keys are pretty easy for me to remember. Also, you have these standard views which use the keypad, number pad. So if you don't have a number pad, it's not going to work. But if I tap 5, for example, I am now looking at the overview of my project. Now it's still in perspective, but this is a great way that you can quickly get views of your model, the kind of 4 orthographic standard views. And those are also available when you are in orthographic mode. So if I go up here to the view style, you'll see 3 little, I don't know, sugar cubes. One is perspective, and that's basically a 3-point perspective. 2-point perspective is going to be the kind of architectural perspective that we have been talking about. Let me just zoom in here. So you can see in a normal perspective view, that's really a 3-point. It looks quite distorted. Where when we go to the architectural 2-point, it now looks much more composed. You can really get a nicer architectural look. But then there is the orthographic view. And this is basically an axonometric, or if you use any of the number pad keys, for example, if I tap 5, this is a floor plan. This is a true floor plan. If I tap 4, that is an elevation. It is a flat view. And if I have a section plane active, it will make it a true section plane. And each of these can be exported into an image file format that you can use in presentations. So export settings and other settings are controlled here in the visual settings dialog box. I'm just going to open that up, and you'll see, first of all, Enscape has a lot of its graphical controls right here in this menu. The most obvious one that's going to affect what you see is the rendering quality. If you drag that quality up, first of all, your Enscape window is going to get slower. So as soon as you make any view modifications, it's going to be a little more pokey. Ultra is going to be very slow. Now, I tend to leave it on medium so that my computer doesn't get too slow. It's a laptop, so it only has so much power. The other thing actually that affects the speed of Enscape is the size of the window. If you want it to run faster, make that window smaller. And I find I'm running it side by side with SketchUp anyway, so it's not a big deal. You can control exposure. And so if you want a darker or lighter look, you can have that ability just by unchecking that box. Typically, Enscape will do it itself. You can also control that projection mode here. Another fun thing that you can do is you can add outlines. So outlines are basically lines, heavy lines along the edge. When you export images, they typically get a lot thinner because of the resolution of these lines. But often images, for example, this one where there's a lot of white on white, it's not going to be a very nice, easy to read drawing. So even just a little bit of outlines is going to be necessary to read the drawing. So anyway, you can undo your changes or you can drag it back to somewhere in the middle. Finally, there are rendering modes. Typically, the default mode shows the materials as they are in SketchUp. There is a white mode, which renders it, you guessed it, kind of white. And it basically just removes all the textures from the model. Polystyrol is meant to look kind of like a model. And here's by the way, when you leave your mouse over some menu option, it will give you the description there. Finally, the light view is actually a calculated lighting level. And this is really great if you're doing electric lighting and you want to find out what kind of light levels you're getting. But I'm going to stick to none. There are a number of image adjustments that you can use. Again, I tend to allow it to adjust itself. However, sometimes if the highlights are getting kind of blown out by the sun, you can raise or lower those. And same with the shadows. In this case, the shadows are not particularly dark. Sometimes I like to lower the saturation. That basically makes it black and white. I like to lower it down a little bit. The SketchUp colors, especially if you use a lot of the default materials, are a little bold. You can also kind of control the color temperature of the image. Over on the right is a much cooler color temperature. On the left is a much warmer color temperature. It's really kind of a matter of personal preference there. I tend to leave the auto contrast on. There are other things, motion blur. This is only really when you're moving. Other things you can add are things like a lens flare. This is jumps in when you're looking kind of at the sun. Other things are things like bloom. What you'll see is basically kind of a glow around bright objects and light sources. Vignetting just kind of makes the perimeter a little darker. Again, these are things you could do in Photoshop. Bloom in particular and lens flare are going to be realistic based on the position of the sun and other lighting. And finally, chromatic aberration, which I believe is an atmospheric effect. I never really notice much when I modify that one. The next tab over is atmosphere, and there's a number of things that you can add. If you turn on fog in SketchUp, you can adjust it here. You can also control how bright the sun is. The brighter you make the sun, in theory, the darker the shadows get. You can also make your shadows sharper or less sharp. In this particular view, it doesn't seem to make actually a whole lot of difference. If you have artificial lighting, you can adjust that to be brighter or less brighter. So for example, if you want an exterior view, but you want the interior windows to be, or interior lighting to show through the windows, you can absolutely do that. Finally, ambient brightness, particularly with interior views, the ambient brightness will just kind of add lighting to the space without any light fixtures in them. This is super handy if you don't have any lighting. Finally, the wind. This is only really when you're in motion. Oh, there's other fun stuff. You can leave it as a white background the way it is, but we can also use things like a desert or an urban area in the background. Here, let's go and set this so we can see that. There we go. So now when we make changes to some of these things, for example, the sun brightness, you can really see everything gets washed out. The shadow sharpness, we can drag it down more or less. But then the big thing is the sky. When we add, say, white cubes in the background, you can get kind of a generic background. And this will fill in around anything that I have drawn. So I've drawn a little plot of grass here. The other thing is, like if you want, I don't know, a construction site, but you don't like this particular view, you can rotate the image around. This is basically a skybox, and you can even get skybox files and use them here. But you know, white cubes are probably fine for me. There are other settings. We can add in some clouds, and I love when you do that. They kind of grow, and you can get more different kinds of clouds, and add in some cirrus, which are the high clouds, and maybe some contrails from. You can really have a blast playing with some of these settings. But you can see, wow, that's kind of looking pretty realistic. You could tweak it again with some of the other features. I don't know. It does feel like it could use a little more ambient brightness, and maybe crank the sun down a little bit. I don't know. Other things, obviously, you can change in Photoshop. Finally, the last tab here is the all-important output menu. And like we saw when we just exported directly from SketchUp, the image size can be changed. So 1920 by 1080, that is basically my screen. You can see here the maximum capture resolution is about 8,000 pixels. Ultra HD is probably good for most of our uses, and what that does is it's doubling my screen ratio. You can also use the window size, and if you change the size of your window, for example, if I stretch down my Enscape window so that it is much smaller, it's going to export that particular size. You can also do a custom size and type in, if I check this box, I can type in 8,000. If for whatever reason you're trying to make an absolutely giant image, you can do that. That will take a little bit of time, but Ultra HD is good for most things that we need. We can allow it to name the document for us, and we can choose a folder. So obviously choose a folder somewhere on your computer. And finally, it has a default option for PNG as the image file format. And like I mentioned, those are great because they include transparency. So if, for example, you have nothing up in the sky, it will export that as nothing, which can then be photoshopped. Now, note that there are other settings here for other types of exports, including a video file, which I'll show later, and then panoramas. So, talking about composing your view in Enscape, it is important to consider the size of the Enscape window. As I mentioned, it can export that size. If not, if you're going to use Ultra HD, for example, turn on this safe frame, and this will show you black areas over what will not get exported. So this is what it will look like exported. I'm just going to leave it unchecked for now. Other things that you can change, for example, this is set at a pretty wide field of view. I can drag this over and make this a much flatter field of view. This tends to be what you're going to use for kind of architectural perspectives. It's kind of like a deep perspective, and that tends to be a nicer look. The other thing you can do is you can change this depth of field, and what this will do is it changes what's going to be in focus. So for example, as I modify this depth of field, I can make things fuzzy in the distance. I can also choose where the focal point is. If I uncheck that box, you see that bright white slash? I can make something in focus right at that point and really make everything much foggier or fuzzier in the background. You see, you almost get like a tilt shift camera effect, which can be quite dramatic as an architectural style. Finally, any changes that you make, it's going to be working a lot faster when you are in this medium mode. But if you want to see what it's going to look like, change to ultra mode and then wait a few seconds for the image to kind of finish rendering. In fact, most of the time with Enscape, there's going to be a delay of a little bit as it recalculates lighting and things like that, especially if you have a lot of electric lighting. So let's talk about some of the assets you can use here in Enscape. And one of the cool things about Enscape is the asset library. Now within the Enscape window, I can just click on this asset library and it will load in whatever it has. This isn't the fastest way to do it, but sometimes, let's say you want to just add a tree, you can search the asset library and there are some trees and you can just click on it and it will place it in the model. Place another one. Place a few different kinds here. You can see that their shape is unique. Close the asset library, and it will say, wait, you are going to, do you want me to apply what you just did? I'll just hit apply and leave, and it will re-render the view with these trees in it. And that's pretty cool. And you can see they're actually blowing in the wind, which is one of the settings. And this is so great because as you're composing your project, you're like, oh, I should put a scale figure in there. Type in person, and hopefully it'll find some people that I can put in there. Let's go with a doctor. To insert them, you just click on them like we did before, place them in your model. There we'll place somebody sitting down. She can be sitting over here. And like I said, close the asset library and apply these elements. Now what's really cool about this is besides the fact that they're immediately rendered and rendered with the characteristics that you have in your view, but they also become part of your SketchUp model. Here I am in my SketchUp model and you can see, oh yeah, there's the people that I placed. These are Enscape assets as they look in the SketchUp model. And you can see they're you know, a little blobby. Again, these are proxy objects which are not going to slow down your model all that much. Now, within the model, you can also go and place these same assets. I'm going to click on the asset library here, and what you'll find is that the first few times that you load this thing, it might take a little while. In fact, if I remember, once it loads the first time, all those essentially micro cookies get placed on your computer, and it won't take quite as long the next time. But anyway, you can just click on an object, and like before, click to place it in your project. Hit escape to get back to the menu. Here we go. We can add a few more objects. And again, they tend to look a little blobby, but that's by design. And notice that any object that comes in is, in fact, a component, so it will respond to the X, Y, and Z axis. For example, a truck is only going to come in on the ground. You'll need to move it up off the ground if you want it to appear that way. And anyway, when you're done placing these objects and you go back to Enscape, you should see them render correctly, assuming that your synchronize or your live updates is checked. Sometimes we uncheck that if you're making a lot of changes to your model. And obviously, sometimes your model gets a little slow and you should just close Enscape if it does. And here you go, my beautiful fire hydrant and mailbox and ambulance. And again, like with components, in regular SketchUp components, if you start adding, a lot of these wine bottles and mugs and things, it will slow your rendering down quite a bit. On the other hand, it absolutely makes it such a richer and more interesting design when you have all those elements in it. So the other fun thing to do in Enscape is to manipulate the materials. And the reason it's so fun is because, first of all, it uses the SketchUp materials you've already used. And if you've created custom ones, it will use those no problem. And even if I go and I say select, I'll just select the grass here in my materials menu, and I edit it, Enscape will live reflect those changes. See how if I drag the color of the grass up, the grass becomes lighter here in my preview menu. However, the biggest changes that you're going to see are going to be if you use the Enscape Material Editor. And it looks kind of like a circle with boxes on it. And here is where you're really going to see some interesting stuff. First of all, there are a number of generic kinds of types of materials. For example, I can change this to carpet, and it will give me the ability to control the height of this material. Maybe not quite as visible unless I get down in my Enscape view and kind of get a close-up of the grass. But with the carpet setting, I can drag it down so it's really, kind of not very tall at all, or make it grow just like that. Look, the guy's getting buried in the grass, and you can add variation or less, so if you want a kind of smoother, plush carpet. Some of these, like clear coat, will look kind of silly with an image, so grass obviously is preferred. And again, the grass setting's slightly different than the carpet settings, but kind of fun that you can change that. You can also change the tint in here if you want, just by kind of adding in I don't know what will look good, make it kind of more autumnal, or I can get rid of that if I want. And then the other thing is how it processes the height of the grass. Normally, it uses what's called the albedo, which is the image file. And you can create bump maps, which is quite complicated, but it has other ways of calculating these, and sometimes it's actually good to kind of try and see which ones look a little better, especially if it's something close up. But this is probably not the view that I would choose, for my front yard. But if it's important, then obviously fiddle with it. Anyway, there's other things you can do, how rough the texture is. This is important for something like, I don't know, frosted glass or metal. The other thing to notice is that here are all the materials in my project. Now, I can't quite remember what they're all called, so you might want to go back to your model and find out what the materials are. Now, I do remember this one here, this concrete. I believe this is the sidewalk. So the other fun thing to do in Enscape is to manipulate the materials. And the reason it's so fun is because, first of all, it uses the SketchUp materials you've already used. And if you've created custom ones, it will use those no problem. And even if I go and I say select, I'll just select the grass here in my materials menu, and I edit it, Enscape will live reflect those changes. See how if I drag the color of the grass up, the grass becomes lighter here in my preview menu. However, the biggest changes that you're going to see are going to be if you use the Enscape Material Editor. And it looks kind of like a circle with boxes on it. And here is where you're really going to see some interesting stuff. First of all, there are a number of generic kinds of types of materials. For example, I can change this to carpet, and it will give me the ability to control the height of this material. Maybe not quite as visible unless I get down in my Enscape view and kind of get a close-up of the grass. But with the carpet setting, I can drag it down so it's really, kind of not very tall at all, or make it grow just like that. Look, the guy's getting buried in the grass, and you can add variation or less. So if you want a kind of smoother, plush carpet. Some of these, like clear coat, will look kind of silly with an image. So grass obviously is preferred. And again, the grass settings slightly different than the carpet settings, but kind of fun that you can change that. You can also change the tint in here if you want, just by kind of adding in I don't know what will look good, make it kind of more autumnal, or I can get rid of that if I want. And then the other thing is how it processes the height of the grass. Normally, it uses what's called the albedo, which is the image file. And you can create bump maps, which is quite complicated, but it has other ways of calculating these, and sometimes it's actually good to kind of try and see which ones look a little better, especially if it's something close up. But this is probably not the view that I would choose, for my front yard. But if it's important, then obviously fiddle with it. Anyway, there's other things you can do, how rough the texture is. This is important for something like, I don't know, frosted glass or metal. The other thing to notice is that here are all the materials in my project. Now, I can't quite remember what they're all called. So you might want to go back to your model and find out what the materials are. Now, I do remember this one here, this concrete. I believe this is the sidewalk. And you can see how it's like pretty shiny for concrete. So we can come down here, and in the concrete menu, now obviously none of these make any sense. It's not, well, let's see. If I make it water, yeah, no, it's not really going to make it much in the way of water. So it makes sense to leave it at generic, but basically when you adjust these other settings, you'll find that it gets more or less reflective. So this material, it basically, as far as I can tell, is just using kind of a generic color, kind of a strangely reflective color. And if you change it to one of these other ones, for example, if I change it to water, look what happens. It becomes watery, which is really actually very, very cool, especially when you're viewing it in virtual reality. Obviously, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for us. But we can change a number of other features. For example, if we want it bumpy, we can use a bump map, and there is no albedo for a solid color, but we can use an image. I happen to have an image of seamless concrete, and if we add that, we can make it appear a little bumpier. In fact, you can click on the image and change its inversion, for example. Sometimes that gets you an interesting result. You can also change the scaling of this. So, I guess I'm in meters here, but we can make this maybe 0.1 meters. See if we can get a little bigger variation. I guess that's about right. Let's try 2. No, that seems to be about the same. So, all right, 1 is fine, and that's basically based on the image size itself. You can change the rotation of it. So the bump map will give you a little bit of texture, and then down here, the reflections, you can do the same. You can basically use an image file if the sliders don't get you very far. And again, oops, not wood, concrete. And sometimes that'll get you some interesting results. You can get a little reflectivity or roughness. And finally, you can do a cutout if you have a black and white image. You can have a cutout of that. So there's a lot of different features here. Most of these materials are using standard SketchUp ones. However, there is a kind of asset library of materials, the Enscape Materials library. And some of these are quite nice, and they already kind of have all their settings. So for example, if you want to try some of this brick, you can select it here and import it into your project. And what you'll find back in SketchUp, let's say I want to paint this material, you'll find it here in your model. It should be called Brick 05. Now, I probably am not going to recognize it unless I look at this as a list view, just because a lot of the bricks, oh, maybe it was Brick 03, they all kind of look similar. But if I choose that and I paint it, you'll see how nicely those materials look. They already have been tweaked with their scale, their albedo, all the different factors, including depth bump maps that make it look bumpy and make the grout or the spacing look really nice. So you can really take advantage of a lot of Enscape's assets rather than spending a lot of time searching on the internet for materials. And these are really fun ways to make your model look interesting. And like I just drew a blob and painted it just a blue color and then made it an Enscape water material. And how fun is that? It just makes your model look interesting. And you can do this with fountains and other stuff like that. And there's really so much you can do with SketchUp materials and Enscape materials. There's a website here, I'll post that in the notes of the video, that really goes into a lot greater detail than I just did about all the different types of materials and the options that are in effect for each one. So this is a great resource for you. The other page that you might want to take a look at is this one here, and this is actually discussing materials for Revit, but what I like about it is it has these great kind of sliders here that you can take a look at individual materials and the settings that are available. Now, a lot of these settings are specific to Revit, but for example, this glossiness one here, you can kind of swipe left and right, or roughness settings here. I don't know. I really enjoy grabbing these sliders and playing around with them just to get a sense of what's out there. So take a look at those and develop your custom materials. The last thing to talk about in terms of Enscape objects is artificial lighting. And sometimes it's handy to set up a view that maybe you're not going to use for anything else other than putting in lighting. And so here I've got a nice view of my ceiling. I can actually, when I've set up the view in Enscape, I can go to my View Management tab and create a view which will be saved right back to my Enscape view. Back in my SketchUp view. So it kind of synchronizes backwards. And you see how now I can really see my whole ceiling quite well because of the wide field of view. So the first thing we'll want to do is make our Enscape view a little more nighttime. And basically I'll just tap the U button until it becomes dark outside. And what this will do is it will force Enscape to start thinking about electric lighting. That's a little dark, but we just want a tiny bit of ambient. And that's a great way when you're working on electric lighting to see the effect that you're having. And Enscape artificial lighting is achieved basically using a series of Enscape objects. They're special objects that are different than the assets. I guess they really are assets, but these are lighting objects. And the simplest one is a sphere. And the way you place these objects, I'll just click on the sphere button here, and you define a reference point by clicking on it first. Then you click on how far from and which direction you want to go from that reference point. And that will be the location of the light source. I'll click here, and what you'll see is now I've made a light bulb hanging in the ceiling here in my SketchUp model, and it's causing light to occur in my Enscape model. And if I move it here in the SketchUp model, and I'll just try and move it down to the floor, you'll see that the light gets a lot closer to the floor. There are other types of lights, including a spotlight. Now, you don't need any geometry in your SketchUp model in order to see the spotlight happen. So for example, if I just click on some spot on the ceiling, click on the spotlight, get this out of the way, and I'll use as my base reference point the middle of this ceiling thing that I created. The spotlight, as you can see, it's basically a cone of light that you can angle and shine on some object. So I'll shine it on, the wall. And same process applies for how you define the location of the focal point, which is basically you click on a spot and then where from that spot do you want to go. So I'll look over at the wall here. And this object, this lighting cone, you actually can select it here and drag how intense the light source is and how wide or narrow the field of view is. And this is great because you can get like a painting or something like that. You can really focus on it. And of course, you can come back in and manipulate it using your editing tools here in Enscape. If you click the Move Light button, it will allow you to modify any of the points that you had before, either the station point, or not the station point, but the anchor points, or the distance angle from those station points. So that's how you put in these spotlights. Now, other types of lights are similar. Linear light, you're going to want to click to place it, click again to define its location. I'll just place it on the face of the ceiling. And it's just a glowing bar. Again, you can drag the sliders to get the intensity. You can see it glowing there in the ceiling. Now, the other thing is the more lights you add, the more that Enscape is going to try to balance your lighting. A couple of other ways that you can handle lighting is actually to put it inside a family, a component. I'm going to go over to my recessed can here, and let's see, I'll just double click on it to edit it. It happens to be a component. Whoops, I gotta have my select command. And this is where that H button becomes so handy, because now I don't have to worry about the rest of the model. And I can come in and I'll stick in, let's do a spotlight. And I'll click in the center of my little family here. And we'll just click right on the surface. But then we can angle it directly down. Let's see, maybe I'll look a little bit farther down here, down at the ground, and place it directly below my light source. Oops, I think I've got it there, more or less. Oh, beam angle is 60 degrees. Yeah, yep, that looks about right. It looks like it's about going on the ground. If I'm not exactly sure, I can go back in and tap the H button to see the rest of my model, and that actually looks about right. Looks like I'm getting it in, oh, well, maybe not. So I can come in and modify the anchor points here, make sure that I've got it pointed in the right direction. Now, what you'll see when you're editing a light source that's inside a component, if you watch what happens when I change this beam angle, you see how they all change? So you do have to be a little careful, make sure that you know which light source you are modifying. And also, of course, make sure that the spread of the light source works for the use that you're going to have it in. Now, if I'm going to have a lot of narrow spots, this would be great for, I don't know, a narrow corridor or a wall wash, for example. I could definitely do that just by getting a real narrow beam spread there. So, for example, if I aim these a little higher on the wall or move them a little closer, I could get a much more even spread, but maybe I want to lower down the intensity so that I get a nice look. Of course, I could also redesign the fixture to get a different beam spread that's more appropriate for a wall wash. One last technique, which is actually sometimes a lot faster than trying to make individual components and make them light up. It's the way we use LED strips these days, and that is to just use a illuminated paint. I've painted some strips meant to be wall washers, and I can go in the Enscape Materials editor, and I have that color selected. I happen to paint it yellow so it's easy to see, and I'll just make it self-illuminated. And like magic, you have a kind of strip linear wall washer, and it tends to produce a very even light, which is basically the way LEDs work nowadays. these recessed cans, you only use those in certain circumstances. These linear strips are actually a lot nicer. And there you go. You can really tweak your objects within Enscape, and in particular, get them to light up in dramatic ways, even existing components. You just have to make sure to get that light source inside an object, make sure that the object is using a transparent material, and like magic, you can have a cool, glowing light fixture. So Enscape is just so much fun. And the last fun thing you can do with Enscape is make a movie. And there's a special integrated video editor here in Enscape. Just turn it on. And what I would recommend is turning on this safe frame just to make sure you know what exactly you're going to be getting in your movie. And the way Enscape works when making movies is you basically show a series of key frames. These are kind of positions and angles and heights of the camera, or a camera. So you'll have a series of cameras. Maybe one's far away, maybe one you walk in, maybe one you even go and walk up and inside, or stand still and look around. And in fact, if you need help, type M for a little map. And the little map, it's not really actually showing all that much right now, but this is the overall view of my project. You could kind of map it out here on the map, like, oh, I'm going to walk forward and maybe look in the front of the building and then turn around. That'll be my movie. So you can kind of plan it out. So I'll tap M to get rid of that map. I don't think I want it as part of my movie. And I'll start from a little farther away. And the way this all works is, first of all, down here at the bottom is kind of your timeline. If you want to add a keyframe, you just click the little plus sign. And this triangle represents a keyframe. And if you want to, say, move forward a little bit, I'll just do that with my scroll wheel and add another keyframe. Now I use the right side keyframe, and that adds a camera position to the right of my timeline. So it basically reads right to left. So I'll add another one over here. Maybe I'll look over to my right without moving and add a keyframe. And then, I don't know, maybe I'll move forward, but I'll look to my left, and I think I'll go down a little bit high. I could also go and hit the space bar, which will put me into walking mode as opposed to flying mode. Either one works. And maybe I'll, in my view, I'll go over and forward, and so I'm going to look inside the building a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Go down a little bit. I seem to be looking. Things are looking up here. So I'm going to look at the front door the whole time, add another keyframe, and finally I'll go over here, but continue to look at this same location and add another keyframe. And then I'll, while standing here, add a few more keyframes to look out at my beautiful landscape. And there you go. That's basically how you set up these keyframes. If you want to see what that looks like, you hit the play button. And what will happen is it will kind of retrace your steps. And in general, when you're viewing it on your screen, it might be a little herky-jerky. This is actually surprisingly good, although you may not hear it, but on my computer the fan is going bananas. And if you don't like the speed of it, for example, or you want to change any one keyframe, all you have to do is click on the keyframe here in the timeline. If the two keyframes are a little bit too far apart, you can add a second one, or you can also, when you select the keyframe, you can come and, for example, change the time of day. Maybe now we want it to be, I don't know, a little late. Or maybe it's taking us a long time to walk through here, and now it's 5 in the afternoon, and in this next keyframe, it'll be 6. And in the next keyframe, it'll be continue to get later and later if we wanted. We can modify a lot of different features. See, now it's dark, and we're starting to see what the electric lighting is looking like inside. And then we can go back and go to these others. So there's a lot of different things that you can change in each of these. And in each camera, all you have to do is change the aspect here, and it will update in your movie. Now, once you like your path, there's a couple things you can do. Up at the top here, there's some tools to help you. One is the grid lines feature. This is kind of the rule of thirds. We tend to focus on what's in the middle quadrant there. And that will not come out in the video, I believe. You can also, there's a couple options here to save the path to a file. And this is a great idea if you think you're going to have to close your computer before exporting it. You want to come back and use it. Choose Save. And then next time you launch Enscape, you can load the path from that file. Just find wherever you saved it. Obviously, it's already in here. Other fun things you can do is you can do stuff like add in sound objects so that as you get closer to those sounds, say the people talking, they'll get louder in your video. And this is extra cool if you're doing like a virtual reality export. But when you're just exporting a video, you know, maybe that's a little weird, but certainly can add a touch to it. Those sound objects are in the Enscape assets library. And finally, then all you need to do now is export the video. And one really cool thing, now that I've exited that keyframe, you can actually see the camera here in the Enscape window. I don't know why I think that's so cool, but I do. I don't know. Anyway, click the export button. Typically, we're going to want to do a high-resolution export. Of course, that could take a little bit of time, so we may want to just go with the full HD at this point in time. But if you're presenting this and you want it to, say, run as a loop, by all means, get that highest quality. So I'll click Export, and it says, where do you want to save it? You'll save it, and then I'll show you what the video looks like. And here's the video file. Very exciting. And you can see that it's a very nice high quality and nice and smooth in its motion, and the clouds and the water and everything are rippling very nicely. One other presentation technique that Enscape can do is it can do virtual reality. Now, the easiest way is actually just to click this button. I don't have a virtual reality headset attached, so nothing will happen, but you absolutely can just do that kind of live on your own computer. You can also share your model with someone else. And to do that, even if they don't have Enscape, you can export in two ways. This EXE standalone will only work on Windows machines. However, it will export a lot of features like any saved scenes that you might want people to go with, and might want them to look at, and it allows them a little bit of graphical control. The web standalone will open up on the internet, and that will give you something that you can share with anybody, including a Mac user. It doesn't seem to work real well on phones or tablets. So this is the EXE standalone version of Enscape. You can see it's basically just like the Enscape window. You can tap H to see the keyboard shortcuts. You can tap M to see a map, scroll in and out to see different parts of the space. And it even has some of these settings, including whether or not you're showing grass. It can activate a virtual reality goggles if you have those, which is really awesome. And then it has some of the other features, the height of the spectator and the speed and all these kinds of fun things. And then our saved views. So you can easily sit there on a phone with the client and say, oh, here's the exterior view, here's the interior view. I only saved two, but really great way to show your model what you're talking about. I mean, even things like changing the time of day, you can make it nighttime, and look at that, all of our lighting effects are saved. Now, this is the web version. You can see it's a little lower resolution, and also we don't have controls like we do in the other one to do as much of the resolution. We also don't have the views available here, so it's a little more rudimentary. You still can go between walk and fly mode. Fly mode allows you to kind of go up into outer space, whereas the walk mode basically glues you to the ground. Those are the same as in the main Enscape window. You can also set it to be orthographic if you want, although probably for most clients that's not going to be so useful. And this has a URL you'll see at the top of your screen. You can share that with anybody you want. So that is basically all you need to know to render your projects and get exportable elements that you can do in presentations of all sorts.